They didn't even look me in the eye when they said it. "You'll sleep in the basement from now on." Just like that. As if I were a piece of furniture they were moving to make space. As if I hadn't paid for the roof over their heads. It was a Tuesday evening, just after dinner. They didn't even wait for the plates to be cleared. Danielle stood near the kitchen doorway, arms folded like she'd been rehearsing her line. Evan, my son, sat at the table, pretending to read something on his phone. "We're turning your room into a workspace," she said, like it was already decided. "It's closer to the bathroom down there anyway. Easier for you." I didn't answer. Not right away. I stared at the fading tulip pattern on the tablecloth. The same one I'd bought 20 years ago, back when this house was mine in name and spirit. Before I handed it over, no, gifted it, to them when they were drowning in debt. Danielle was 3 months pregnant then. They needed help. "Only until we get back on our feet," Evan had said. That was 12 years ago. "I see," I finally said. It was all I could manage. They mistook my silence for agreement. Danielle started explaining how they'd cleared the basement space, even bought a rug to make it cozy. Cozy. A cement floor, one small window facing the garbage bins, and a ceiling that groans every time someone walks overhead. They didn't ask if I was okay with it. They didn't care. Evan just nodded occasionally, still scrolling, like he couldn't even be bothered to look up while his wife demoted his mother to the basement. I went downstairs that night without a word. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old paint. A twin mattress had been pushed against the wall. My dresser, the one my father built with his own hands, was gone, replaced by a plastic folding table. My things, books, photographs, even the knitted blanket I always kept at the foot of the bed, were piled in a corner, boxed like I'd died. I didn't sleep. Not really. My back ached. My knees protested every time I moved. But it wasn't the body that kept me awake. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that fills you with noise. Memories, disappointments, conversations you should have had years ago. I stared at the ceiling, the bare bulb casting shadows that danced with every creak above. It wasn't even anger I felt. Not yet. That would come later. What I felt was something else. A crack inside me, deep and cold. A clarity. They had made their choice. They had drawn the line. And for the first time in a long time, I decided to draw mine. By sunrise, I was dressed and upstairs making coffee. Danielle came into the kitchen in her robe, barely glancing at me. She poured herself some oat milk and scrolled through her phone. I said nothing. Not a word. I made my list in silence. Room measurements, storage options, tenant platforms. I hadn't handled online ads before, but I raised 2 kids before Google existed. I'd figure it out. When Evan finally emerged, he nodded in my direction like he was doing me a favor. "You sleep okay?" "Fine," I said. I didn't add that I'd already called my old friend Maeve, who used to rent out her upstairs rooms to college students, or that I'd already sketched out a floor plan for both bedrooms on the second floor, the ones they used, the ones I was about to put back into circulation. By noon, I had the listings drafted. Bright, airy upstairs bedrooms in quiet central neighborhood, shared kitchen, separate bath, female tenants preferred. No pets. I listed the rent a little lower than market. I didn't need the money. I needed the movement, the change, the control. Danielle left around midday to go work from the cafe. Evan locked himself in my bedroom for calls. I measured the hall. I wiped the windows. I vacuumed the rugs they never bothered to clean. I was still polite, still invisible. But not for much longer. The first message came before 5 p.m. "Hi, is the room still available? My name is Layla. I'm a grad student starting a teaching placement nearby." "Yes, Layla, it is. It absolutely is." I bought this house in 1987. It wasn't much back then, just a narrow 2-bedroom with creaky floors and wallpaper that peeled in the corners. But it was mine. I signed the papers alone, wearing my secondhand coat and shoes that pinched. Evan was 4 at the time. Danielle wasn't in the picture yet. Just the ghost of a future daughter-in-law I couldn't have imagined. I paid every mortgage check on time, even when the laundromat barely made enough to cover payroll. I painted the kitchen myself. I planted the rose bushes that still bloom along the front path. I replaced the roof twice. And when Evan lost his job, the second time, not the first, I offered them this place. "Just until you get back on your feet," I'd said. "It's too much house for me anyway." I moved into the guest room and signed the deed over to Evan to help him qualify for a loan. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for anything. Now, nearly 15 years later, I sleep in a basement that smells like wet socks. I still remember the day they moved in, the way Danielle squealed over the fireplace, the way Evan hugged me so tight I nearly lost my breath. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. "We won't forget this." But they did. They forgot. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they just decided gratitude had an expiration date. I spent that afternoon answering messages from interested tenants. One was too young, another too loud. Then I got a call from a woman named Marcia, 42, recently divorced social worker. Needed a quiet place for 6 months while she got settled. No pets, non-smoker, references ready. We talked for 15 minutes. She said "ma'am" like she meant it. I liked her. When Danielle got home, she passed me in the hallway without a word. Her fingers clicked across her phone screen. "The internet's slow again," she muttered, mostly to herself. "Gotta call the provider." I smiled politely, thinking about how she'd react when her bedroom became someone else's by next week. That night, I didn't go down to the basement. I stayed in the kitchen, sipping tea and sorting through old mail. Evan walked in around 9. "Everything okay?" he asked, like I was a guest in my own home. "Lovely," I said. "Just catching up on some things." He didn't ask what things. Later, I opened the drawer by the fridge, the one they never touched, and pulled out the manila envelope. Inside was a copy of the original deed, the transfer agreement, and the last will I'd updated 6 years ago. My name wasn't on the title anymore. But my hand had built this house. And what my hands built, I could still reclaim in spirit. I lay in the basement that night, staring at the ceiling. Every step above echoed like a drumbeat. The heater kicked in with a wheeze. I pulled the old blanket over my legs and closed my eyes. I remembered the night Danielle told me, sweetly, that I shouldn't come into the kitchen while she was cooking, just to keep things simple. I remembered when Evan stopped calling me Mom and started saying Ruth. I remembered my birthday last year when no one brought a cake. I remembered everything. In the morning, I confirmed with Marcia. Move-in scheduled for Sunday. She'd take Danielle's room, the larger of the two. "I hope I'm not disrupting your family," she'd said gently on the phone. "Not at all," I replied. "It's time this house had a little respect in it again." By noon, I had a second tenant. Rosa, a nurse, early shift at the city clinic, looking for a place to sleep during the day and study at night. Quiet, respectful, kind. She'd take Evan's room, I printed out basic rental agreements. I booked a locksmith. I scheduled a deep cleaning. And still, no one upstairs noticed a thing. The basement had no clock, but I knew it was just after 6 a.m. when the pipes started their usual moan. Someone upstairs flushed. Then the thud of heavy feet across the floorboards. Evan heading for the shower. Danielle's voice floated down a moment later, annoyed about something. The weak bulb above me buzzed in rhythm with my thoughts. I hadn't unpacked. My clothes were still in the same laundry basket I brought down 3 nights ago. I kept them folded. I refused to let this place rearrange me. The mattress sagged in the middle. My back ached from it, but I made the bed carefully each morning anyway. Old habits. There were no windows to speak of, only a high slit near the ceiling that let in a dull, gray stripe of daylight. I could see the base of the trash bins through it. Sometimes a squirrel's tail flicked by. Sometimes a foot. Danielle's boots. Evan's sneakers. Coming and going as if the woman downstairs didn't exist. But I did exist. And this morning, I felt more real than I had in years. The first tenant, Marcia, was set to arrive in 3 days. I'd told her we were reorganizing some things in the house, but the room would be ready. She'd laughed kindly. "I've slept in worse," she'd said. "As long as there's a lock on the door and a clean floor, I'm golden." That made me think about Danielle's rugs, the ones she bought online and insisted were handmade. I wondered how she'd feel seeing her decorative throws boxed up and stacked in the hall closet. I stood slowly, joints stiff from the damp. My knees always took a few minutes to cooperate now. I climbed the basement stairs without sound, the way women learn to move when they've spent their lives not being a bother. Danielle was already in the kitchen. She turned when I entered, her expression unreadable. "Oh, morning." "Morning." She was dressed in her usual neutral colors, sipping some green smoothie from a tall glass. The blender still dripped on the counter. The sink was full again. I moved past her and reached for the kettle. She didn't say anything else. I sat at the table with my tea and watched the steam rise. Evan joined us a few minutes later, tapping messages into his phone. "Internet's out again," he said, not looking up. I nodded. I'd unplugged the router the night before, just long enough to finish my tenant contracts. It was plugged in again now. Let them figure that part out. "You feeling okay down there?" he asked, suddenly remembering I was human. "Fine," I said. "It's quiet." "That's good." Silence returned. Danielle left first. Evan after. I was alone by 8:15. That gave me a full day to move. I started with their closets. Not to touch their clothes, that wasn't my place, but to measure the space and figure out where a dresser could fit. Marcia said she had one. Rosa was bringing a bed frame. I'd asked both to be respectful, and they agreed. By noon, I had both rooms cleared. I boxed Danielle's makeup, hairdryer, skincare bottles. I wrapped them in towels and stacked the boxes neatly in the basement corner, the one farthest from the leaking pipe. I stripped the sheets, folded them, placed them in a bag. I wiped the windows, dusted the blinds, swept the baseboards. Then I stood in the hallway and looked at the doors. These had once been Evan's childhood space and the spare room we used for guests. I'd painted them myself, sunflower yellow in '91, then changed to pale blue when he turned 13, and decided yellow was for babies. Later, Danielle made him paint them gray. "Mature," she'd said. I had nodded. I didn't mind gray. What I minded was disappearing. When Evan got home that evening, I was back downstairs. The kettle had just whistled, and I was carrying a tray of tea and toast when I heard the first slam. Ruth? Footsteps. Another slam. Then louder. Ruth, did you move our stuff? I set the tray down carefully. He was at the top of the stairs now, staring down. Why are our things boxed up? What's going on? I climbed 2 steps up, slow and calm. I needed to prepare the rooms. They've been rented. You what? I rented them out. He blinked like I'd spoken in code. You can't rent out our rooms. I did. Are you serious? I met his eyes. Dead serious. Behind him, I could hear Danielle's voice rising. Is this a joke? No, I said. You told me to sleep in the basement. I took that to mean you were finished with the upstairs. I've simply made use of what you no longer need. Neither of them spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then Evan said the only thing he could think of. You can't do that. But I already had. The next morning, I made pancakes. I hadn't made pancakes in years, not since Evan was in high school and still called me Mom instead of Ruth. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter, and for once I didn't feel like I had to tiptoe around their routines. I used the good skillet, the one Danielle always hoarded in the back cupboard. She came in halfway through the second batch, hair frizzed from sleep, wearing one of Evan's old college sweatshirts. She froze at the threshold, blinking at the stovetop. What's all this? Breakfast, I said simply. She hovered, then moved to the fridge. You usually don't cook this much. I usually don't sleep in a basement either. She didn't reply. She took her almond milk and left the room, muttering something I didn't ask her to repeat. I plated 4 pancakes and drizzled honey on top. It was a small indulgence. I felt entitled. By 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Right on time. Marcia arrived with 1 suitcase and a plant. She was shorter than I'd imagined from her voice. A compact woman with a tight braid and clear eyes. She smiled the moment she saw me. You must be Ruth. I am. Come in. I led her to the room. Danielle's room. It was spotless. I'd opened the window an hour before to let in the morning sun. The boxes of Danielle's makeup and jewelry were stacked neatly in the basement. I'd kept it all. I wasn't cruel. But the room no longer belonged to her. This is lovely, Marcia said, setting her plant by the window. More than I expected. I nodded. Bathrooms across the hall. Kitchens shared, of course. Laundry's in the basement. You'll have your own shelf in the fridge. Perfect. She handed me an envelope with the first month's rent, already sealed and labeled. I placed it in the drawer under the phone. An hour later, Rosa arrived. A tall woman in blue scrubs, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Night shift, she explained as I showed her to Evan's old room. I'll be quiet as a mouse, I swear. You just rest, I said gently. The bed's made. Let me know if you need anything. She nodded gratefully and disappeared into the room without another word. I didn't blame her. That kind of tired lives in the bones. By noon, the house had changed. You could feel it in the walls, like someone had cracked a window in a long, sealed room. The air moved again. Evan returned home at 5:30. I was folding laundry in the living room when the front door slammed. There's a stranger in our bathroom, he barked. She's not a stranger, I replied, not looking up. Her name is Marcia. She's paid up through March. He stared at me like I was a wild animal. You're renting to people? In our house? I folded one of his old shirts and set it in the basket. It's my house too, Evan. He ran a hand through his hair. You can't just... You didn't even talk to us about this. Did you talk to me before you moved me into the basement? He froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, he looked like a boy caught in a lie. Danielle entered then, holding her phone like a weapon. I'm calling someone, she snapped. This isn't legal. I stood, calm, steady. Actually, it is. The tenants have short-term leases. I followed zoning laws. And since I pay utilities and taxes in this house, which you may have forgotten, I have every right to rent unused space. You're insane, she whispered. No, I said. I'm just done being invisible. She opened her mouth to retort, but I raised a hand. And just to be clear, I boxed your things with care. They're in the basement. Nothing is missing, nothing is touched. But you won't be sleeping upstairs tonight. Evan looked at me like he was seeing someone else. Where are we supposed to sleep? I shrugged. There's a twin bed downstairs. Cozy, they say. Then I turned and went to make tea. They didn't come down for dinner. I heard them moving around the basement. Low voices. Something dropped. Maybe a suitcase thudding against the concrete floor. Danielle slammed the washer lid at one point, like that might rattle me. But it didn't. I was upstairs, setting the table for 3. Marcia joined me first, still in slacks and a soft cardigan. She had brought a small loaf of cranberry bread as a thank you for being so kind. Rosa followed 10 minutes later, still groggy from her nap, hair up in a messy bun. She mumbled an apology for her appearance. I told her not to worry. We ate chicken stew and shared quiet conversation. Marcia asked if I liked crosswords. Rosa complimented the throw pillows in the living room. Neither asked about the basement. I appreciated that. It was the most peaceful meal I'd had in that house in years. After dinner, I washed dishes while Rosa returned to her room and Marcia curled up with a book in the armchair by the front window. The house felt right, like it had slipped back into the version of itself it was always meant to be. No shouting, no doors slamming, no eggshells to walk on. Around 9, I brought down a folded blanket and a spare set of towels. Evan answered the basement door with his jaw tight. I figured you'd need these, I said simply, handing them over. He hesitated, then took them without a word. Danielle was behind him, arms crossed, sitting on the edge of the old cot I used to keep for guests. Now it was their bed. Are you seriously going through with this? She asked. I already did. You don't need the money. No, I said. But I do need my dignity, and my space, and maybe a little peace. She scoffed. This is petty. No, I replied evenly. What you did to me was petty. This is correction. I turned and climbed the stairs before she could reply. That night I slept in my own bed. Not the one in the basement. Not the twin mattress they gave me like a dog crate. No. My original bed. In my original room, with the windows cracked just enough to hear the breeze. Danielle's perfume still lingered faintly on the curtains. I didn't mind. It would fade. By morning, the mood in the house had shifted. They stayed in the basement longer than usual. I could hear them whispering, strategizing. But when I passed them in the kitchen around noon, on my way out to the porch with a book, Evan only nodded stiffly. Danielle, as expected, ignored me. I sat on the porch swing, watching the neighbor across the street wrestle her trash bins into line. Maeve, my friend since 1962, waved and came over. I heard you've got tenants, she said with a smirk. I do, I replied, flipping a page. Good ones? Very. She paused, then leaned closer. So, what happened? They told me to sleep in the basement. Maeve's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline. They what? I just smiled. She let out a low whistle. Well, looks like someone finally lit their own match. Later that afternoon, Rosa left for her shift and Marcia took a walk to the bookstore. I cleaned the kitchen, took out the trash, and sent in the rental applications for a longer lease. Both women had expressed interest. I saw no reason to delay. That evening, Evan knocked on the living room door. Not barged in, knocked. "Can we talk?" I nodded. He sat, awkward, like he was trying to remember how chairs worked. "We didn't mean to hurt you," he said. I tilted my head. "We just thought—" He exhaled. "We thought you'd be more comfortable down there. It's quieter. You know, out of the way." I looked at him. Really looked. "That's the point, Evan. Out of the way." He swallowed. "I didn't want things to come to this." "Neither did I. I guess we just took you for granted." "You did." He was quiet a long time. Then, "Can we fix it?" I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, "You can start by realizing this house isn't just yours to fix. And neither am I." Then I stood and opened the door for him. "I think that's enough talk for one night." They didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not out of rage, I think, though Danielle was surely boiling, but out of confusion. They didn't know how to exist in a house where I wasn't silent, where I didn't flinch, where I had drawn a boundary they couldn't ignore or manipulate. For years, I'd played the quiet one, the giver, the bridge they walked across without noticing the cracks forming beneath their feet. Now the bridge had stepped away. Danielle avoided me entirely. She went from kitchen to basement like a ghost, never meeting my eye, never acknowledging Marcia or Rosa. Once I passed her on the stairs, and she turned sideways sharply, as if I might brush against her and stain her somehow. That amused me more than it should have. Evan tried small talk, awkward nods, the occasional morning, but he didn't push. Not yet. The girls, meanwhile, settled in like they'd always belonged. Rosa was quiet but kind. She left notes on the fridge when she took the last of something. Marcia brought home fresh flowers for the hallway, saying, "This place deserves a little color." I agreed. At dinner, we sat around the table. 3 women of different generations and backgrounds, sharing the same space, the same quiet. Marcia talked about the kids she counseled, Rosa about the impossible hours at the clinic. I mostly listened. I found I liked listening more now, without the undercurrent of dismissal, without being treated like an old vase in the corner. They asked questions. They wanted to know about me. That part startled me more than anything. I told them about the laundromat I used to own, how I worked 2 jobs while raising Evan, how I fixed the garbage disposal myself one Christmas Eve because the plumber canceled last minute, how I once drove across 3 counties to get a particular brand of tea my husband loved before he died. "They don't make them like you anymore," Rosa said softly. "They do," I said. "They just go quiet after a while." On the 4th morning, I found Danielle in the living room, arms folded, eyes hard. "We need to talk," she said. I sat down calmly. "All right. This is insane. You've turned our home into a hostel." "No," I said. "I've restored balance. You turned this into a space where I was unwanted. I'm simply using what's mine. You gave us this house. I gave you shelter. That doesn't mean I gave up my dignity." She scoffed. "You're punishing us." "I'm protecting myself." She narrowed her eyes. "And what happens when your little tenants move on? You think they'll stay forever?" "Nothing stays forever," I said. "That's why it matters how you treat people while they're here." She didn't reply, just turned on her heel and left, heels clicking like a threat. She wanted a war. I wasn't giving her one. I was giving her silence. And silence, when chosen, is its own kind of thunder. Later that day, Evan knocked again. I looked at some rentals, he admitted, standing in the doorway with his shoulders slumped. There's a place a few blocks down. You thinking of moving? I don't know, he said. Danielle is. And you? He hesitated. I guess I just miss when things were simpler. I looked at him for a long time. My son. The boy I raised. The man who learned to look through me. Things weren't simpler, Evan. I was just quieter. He sat down heavily. I think I got so used to you being there, always there, that I forgot you had limits. You didn't forget, I said. You stopped caring. He flinched, and for once, he didn't argue. That night, I stood at the window with a cup of tea, watching the soft glow of porch lights flicker on across the street. In the basement, there was movement, maybe packing, maybe sulking. Upstairs, Marcia laughed at something on her phone. Rosa's door was cracked, soft music drifting out. I was still here, but I wasn't the same. The first Saturday morning with tenants felt almost joyful. Marcia was already in the kitchen when I came in, sipping coffee from a mug that said, "Social workers fix broken systems." She greeted me with a warmth I hadn't felt in this house in years. I started a pot, she said, gesturing toward the coffee maker. Didn't want to touch your fancy French press. I respect boundaries. I smiled. That's more than I can say for most. We shared toast and mild weather complaints until Rosa came in, hair still damp, wearing scrubs. She looked tired, but peaceful. Night shift again, I asked. Yup, she yawned. 12 hours of patching up people who think they're invincible. I offered her eggs. She refused politely, saying she needed sleep more than food. Upstairs, Evan and Danielle's silence thudded like furniture being moved. The girls had made themselves at home without overstepping, a balance Danielle never even attempted. Rosa had cleaned her bathroom without being asked. Marcia left me a thank you note after I baked muffins. Real adults. Real respect. Around noon, I heard the front door slam. Evan's footsteps down the porch. Car starting. Danielle didn't follow. Good. I took the opportunity to bring a few things upstairs, not out of spite, but because I had every right to reclaim the spaces I used to own. The linen closet, for instance, had become Danielle's unofficial hoard of expired bath products and seasonal decor. I boxed it all up, labeled neatly, and brought it down to the basement. I stored it next to the plastic tubs where my own belongings had been dumped just a week before. Marcia peeked into the hallway as I passed. Need help? No, dear. Just realigning a few things. Danielle emerged from the basement an hour later. She didn't speak. Her face was blotchy, as if she'd been crying, but I wasn't moved by that anymore. Danielle cried when she didn't get her way. I'd seen her tears 100 times, and never once had they been for anyone else. By evening, she was packing. Not in a loud, showy way. Danielle never did anything without narrative. This was quiet, deliberate packing. The kind that meant a decision had been made. Evan came home to it. Their voices rose behind the closed basement door. I didn't strain to hear. I didn't need to. I'd heard every variation of that argument over the years. This isn't working. I can't live like this. Your mother is impossible. Now the words had shifted. This isn't her fault, Evan said, not loudly, but clearly. That part stopped me. I stood in the hallway, my hand resting on the doorframe. You moved her downstairs, he continued. You treated her like some squatter. What did you think was going to happen? You're taking her side? I'm seeing her side, he snapped. Danielle laughed, bitter and sharp. Too late for that, Evan. The next morning, she was gone. Just like that. Her side of the basement was empty, the air scrubbed clean of her citrus-sweet perfume. She didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. Evan didn't come up for hours. When he did, he looked older, worn out in a way that went beyond sleep. She left, he said flatly. I know. She said she needs space to think. Give her space, then. He nodded, sinking into the chair like someone who'd forgotten how to sit upright. I didn't offer sympathy. Instead, I handed him a cup of tea and said, When you're ready, there's a leaky pipe downstairs. I'd appreciate you fixing it. He blinked, then nodded again. Yeah, I can do that. And for the first time in a very long while, he meant it. It was remarkable how quiet the house became after Danielle left. Not just in the obvious ways. Fewer slamming doors, no blender roaring before sunrise, no high-heeled steps echoing down the hall, but in the energy. The air settled. No tension clinging to the corners. No sense that I had to brace for some offhand remark or cutting glance. Evan moved like a man slowly waking up in his own skin. He didn't apologize again. He didn't grovel. But he picked up a wrench and fixed the leaky pipe in the basement by noon. He ran to the store for caulk and came back with tulips, clumsily wrapped like an afterthought. Thought they might look nice on the porch, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. They do. That was enough. I didn't need an apology wrapped in guilt or tears. I needed action, respect. He was learning. Marcia helped me rehang the curtains in the upstairs hallway that afternoon. We worked quietly, companionably, as sunlight poured in through the freshly washed windows. She hummed something under her breath. A hymn, maybe, or an old folk song. I didn't recognize it, but it felt warm. Rosa baked banana bread on her day off. The smell drifted through the whole house. She offered slices to Evan, who accepted with a hesitant thank you. That evening, as we sat around the table, just the three of us women, I realized I hadn't felt this version of home in decades. The kind where nobody is being tolerated, where conversation is light and laughter isn't suspicious, where silence isn't punishment, but peace. Evan passed through the room once on his way to the kitchen, nodded to us, and left us to our rhythm. I appreciated that. He was learning when to step in and when to step back. The next day brought a letter. I found it in the mailbox, addressed to me in Danielle's neat handwriting. She'd always had lovely penmanship, sharp angles, even spacing. It was one of the first things I liked about her, back when I was still hopeful. I opened it with no expectations. Ruth, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. That's fair. I don't know how to make sense of everything that's happened. I keep trying to explain myself, but it sounds selfish even in my own head. Maybe I was scared of you. Not in the way people think, not of your anger or your judgment, but of how much space you took up without even trying. You made this house feel like yours even after you handed it to us. I was never going to win in that shadow. So I tried to shrink you, and I hate that I did that. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say, I see it now. Danielle. I read it once, folded it, and placed it in the drawer near the stove. I didn't need to respond. Some things are better left without punctuation. 2 days later, Evan came into the kitchen with a notebook and pen. He poured himself coffee, then sat across from me. I was thinking, he said, about converting the old garage into a proper studio or guest space. I raised an eyebrow. I'd cover the cost, he added quickly. It could be something for you, or maybe the tenants if you keep renting. Just, I want to be useful. I nodded slowly. Start with painting the porch railings, I said. The rest can wait. He smiled faintly and wrote it down. That afternoon, he did exactly that. No questions, no shortcuts. The paint was uneven. The rails still wobbled slightly. But it was a beginning, the kind that comes not with promises, but with presence. And for once, presence was enough. It rained all day Tuesday, the kind of steady, unhurried rain that doesn't rush to end, the kind that soaks deep into the ground and makes you feel like the world's been muted just slightly. The windows fogged up. The porch steps glistened. The tulips Evan brought the week before held tiny beads of water like pearls cupped in their petals. I stayed inside. Marcia had a morning session and left with her umbrella angled high and confident. Rosa worked a night shift, so she slept late, then shuffled into the kitchen around noon in fuzzy socks and made toast. She offered me some without asking if I'd eaten. Small gestures, the kind that matter more than grand ones. Evan came upstairs in the late afternoon with a toolbox and a tentative look. I thought I'd start on the hallway light, he said. It's been flickering. It had. For months. Danielle used to say it gave the house character. I used to say nothing. Go ahead, I said. He worked quietly, carefully. The new bulb was bright but soft, not the harsh white Danielle favored. Evan stood back to admire it, then caught me watching. I'll do the bathroom grout next, he said. I nodded. He didn't linger. He didn't ask for praise. He simply returned to the basement where he now stayed alone, in the space he once sentenced me to. Poetic, really. That evening, Rosa left for her shift with a thermos and a sandwich I'd wrapped for her. She looked embarrassed when I handed it over. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, I said. I wanted to. She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. Quick, light, like something borrowed from a memory that wasn't hers. Thank you, she said, and disappeared into the rain. Afterward, I sat in the armchair by the window, sipping tea and watching the streetlights shimmer through the water-blurred glass. The quiet in the house wasn't the empty kind. It was full of respect, of space, of choices that finally felt mine again. Around 8, Marcia came home. She'd picked up a second-hand bookshelf on her way and asked if I'd help her assemble it. We laid out the pieces on the living room rug. Evan passed through once, nodded politely, then kept walking. I saw him glance at the tools, but he didn't offer. He knew better. We built it slowly, laughing at the lopsided instructions. Marcia's sleeves kept slipping down, and she muttered under her breath like a sailor every time the Allen wrench slipped. When we finished, she placed her books one by one. Titles about trauma, resilience, forgotten poets. Then she pulled out a small photo of a young boy and placed it in the center. Your son? I asked. My brother, she said. We were foster kids. I lost track of him when I was 12. Never saw him again. I didn't press, just nodded and placed a hand gently on her arm. We didn't speak again after that. We didn't need to. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a list, not of tasks, but of things I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, self, choice, voice, company without obligation, silence without punishment, laughter that stayed after it echoed. I folded the list and slipped it into the drawer with Danielle's letter. Some things hurt, some things heal, And some things, like the feel of your own home finally returning to you, are too sacred to write in ink. Evan came up the next morning with an envelope in his hand. He hovered by the kitchen door, unsure if he should step inside. I was already seated with a crossword and half a cup of coffee. Marcia had left early for a workshop. Rosa was still sleeping. The house was quiet, open. He cleared his throat. Mail came yesterday. This was mixed in. I took the envelope. A water bill, addressed jointly to both our names. Danielle must have never updated the account after transferring the house. She'd never been much for details, only control. "Thank you," I said, setting it beside me. He didn't move. "You know," he began, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, "I've been thinking about what you said, about space and balance." I glanced up. "And? I think I've been treating this house like a prize I won instead of something we share. I didn't mean to make you feel small, Mom." That word again. Mom. He hadn't used it in weeks, maybe months. "I didn't feel small," I said. I felt erased. He flinched, but he didn't argue. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked, not defiantly, not even sadly, just asking. Like it had finally occurred to him that it was possible. I considered him for a long moment. "No," I said. "I want you to see this house for what it is. A home. Not yours. Not mine. A space we share. As equals." He nodded slowly. "I think I can try that. I think you'll need to." That afternoon, I sent a message to the contractor Maeve had recommended. A quote for reinforcing the attic stairwell, adding insulation, replacing a few warped floorboards. If Evan was serious about helping, I'd give him real work. By evening, the house hummed with activity. Rosa was prepping for her night shift, humming something soft under her breath as she packed a lunch. Marcia was on the porch with a book. I watered the plants in the hallway and made a mental note to repaint the trim. That's when the second knock came. This one wasn't Evan. It was Danielle. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, chin lifted like a challenge. Her suitcase stood behind her like a quiet accusation. "I came to get my things," she said. I stepped aside. She walked in without removing her shoes, always had. Straight down the hall to the basement. I didn't follow. A few minutes later, I heard the rustling of plastic, the zip of bags, the sharp click of a hanger snapping against a rack. I went about my evening, peeled potatoes, set out plates, checked the thermostat. When she emerged, she was carrying 3 bags and an expression somewhere between pride and guilt. "I didn't think you'd still be renting out the bedrooms," she said. "I still am." She hesitated. "You know they're talking. The neighbors. They always do. Don't you care?" "I care about respect," I said evenly. "And peace. Gossip doesn't pay the gas bill." She didn't reply, just looked around the house. The cleaned windows, the polished table, the bookshelf Marcia had filled with her paperbacks. "I didn't think you'd really go through with it," she murmured. "I know. I thought you'd yell, maybe cry, maybe beg." "I don't do that anymore." Danielle stood very still. "Tell Evan I hope he figures out what he wants," she said finally. "I think he's starting to," I said. "But you'll have to tell him that yourself." She nodded, then quieter. "You're not the same woman I moved in with." "I am," I said, meeting her eyes. "You just never looked closely enough." Danielle walked out into the dusk with her suitcase and a face I didn't recognize. Not smug, not triumphant, just hollow. Marcia appeared in the doorway moments later. Was that your daughter-in-law? Something like that. She gave a little smile. Want help with dinner? Always. As we chopped and stirred and seasoned, I realized something. This house no longer echoed. It responded. And that's how I knew it was mine again. Evan didn't take it well. Not at first. I heard him come upstairs late that night, long after dinner had been cleared and the dishes washed. The floor creaked under his step like it used to when he was a teenager sneaking in past curfew. Quiet, but not quiet enough. I was in the kitchen, sipping chamomile tea, the overhead light dimmed low. He didn't see me at first. When he did, he froze. She's gone. I nodded. I know. She's not coming back. I figured. He didn't sit, just hovered near the counter, restless. His hands moved like they wanted to hold something, but couldn't decide what. She said I chose you over her, he muttered. That I always would. I didn't answer. He paced a few steps, then stopped. You didn't have to rent the rooms, you know. You could have just told us how you felt. I did, I said quietly. Every day, in every way. You just didn't listen. His jaw tensed. You embarrassed us. Inviting strangers into the house. No, I interrupted. I reclaimed what was mine. And you know what's truly embarrassing, Evan? Being told to sleep next to exposed pipes while your son and his wife spread out in the rooms you built with your hands. That's embarrassing. The air between us pulsed. He didn't respond. Finally, he turned toward the hallway. This can't go on forever, Mom. You know that. No, I said, setting my teacup down gently. But it'll go on as long as I decide it should. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Not gentle, not neighborly. Sharp. Intentional. I opened it to find a man in a windbreaker holding a clipboard. Good morning, Mrs. Ruth Mackenzie? Yes. I'm here regarding a complaint filed by one of the property owners at this address. He flipped the clipboard. Allegations of illegal subletting. I almost smiled. Come in, I said calmly. Let me show you the paperwork. We sat at the dining table. Marcia offered him coffee, which he declined. Rosa poked her head out briefly, then disappeared. Evan lingered by the hallway, watching but saying nothing. I placed the leases on the table one by one. All under 30-day terms. All signed, witnessed. The home is owner-occupied, with shared facilities, zoned as a single-family residence with allowance for short-term adult tenants. He looked through the documents slowly, nodding. You filed this paperwork yourself? He asked. I did. I also confirmed with the zoning office and consulted a housing attorney. Would you like his card? The man looked almost sheepish. No, ma'am. Everything appears in order. I stood. Then I assume there's nothing further? He rose as well. No, ma'am. I apologize for the inconvenience. He glanced briefly toward Evan on his way out, then stepped into the morning sunlight and disappeared down the walk. The door closed with a soft click. Evan still stood there. You called them? I asked. He looked away. I didn't think you'd go this far. You mean I didn't break down when you pushed me? That I didn't fold? I thought I could stop it. That's been your problem, Evan, I said gently. You think everything is yours to stop, to allow, to control. But I'm not waiting for your permission anymore. He said nothing. I walked past him and into the kitchen. Marcia was still there, sipping her coffee, watching me like someone watching the tide finally come in. Everything okay? She asked. Better than okay, I said, reaching for a fresh mug. Everything's finally in place. That afternoon, I drafted a new version of my will. I named Evan as my son, but not my executor. I included a letter, not bitter, not scolding. just clear, honest. The kind of letter a woman writes when she's finally remembered who she is. And for the first time in years, I didn't second guess a single word. He waited until late that night to come upstairs again. I was in the living room folding towels. Rosa had left them in the dryer after her shift, and I didn't mind. I found something steady in the rhythm of it, in the way fabric folds into itself, in the warmth that lingers even after the machine has stopped. Evan stood in the doorway, hands buried in his pockets, eyes dark with something I couldn't name. Not anger, not shame. Something older. "Can I sit?" I nodded, without looking up. He sat on the edge of the sofa like it might reject him. "I read the lease agreements," he said quietly. "I went through the paperwork after you showed them to the inspector. Everything you did, it's legal." "I know." "I thought you were just bluffing, trying to scare us." I folded the last towel and placed it gently on the stack. "I was never bluffing," I said. "I was surviving." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize," I said. And my voice wasn't cruel, but it didn't soften for him either. Because it was easier that way. Easier to pretend I was just some old woman taking up space in your house. Easier to think I didn't feel it. The cold, the silence, the way you stopped saying good morning, the way Danielle rolled her eyes when I spoke, the way you let her. He stared at the floor. "You said you needed the house. You said it would just be a few years. And I believed you. I handed it over, Evan. I signed it away to help you. And do you know what you gave me in return?" He didn't answer. "A basement?" I said. "You gave me mold and pipes and a mattress like an afterthought, like a burden to store." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "No. You don't get to explain yet. You get to listen." I stood, slowly. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator down the hall. "I was your mother before I was anything else. Before I was a homeowner, before I was widowed, before I was tired. I wiped your nose. I sold my wedding ring to pay for your braces. I walked to work so you could have the car for college. I did all of that without asking for a medal. But what I did expect eventually was respect." He looked up then, and I saw tears in his eyes. Not dramatic, not performative, just real, unfiltered. The kind that come too late. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you," he whispered. "I do," I said. "The day Danielle moved in. You made yourself small to keep her, and you made me smaller so she'd feel big. You shrank me, Evan, room by room, word by word." "I was afraid," he said, the words cracking. "Afraid of losing what we had." "You didn't lose what we had," I said softly. "You gave it away." He pressed his palms to his eyes. "I'm sorry." "I believe you." I sat again, the folded towels warm in my lap. "But being sorry doesn't undo it," I said. "You don't get to cry and go back to the beginning." "There is no beginning. There's only now." He nodded silently. "I don't hate you, Evan. You're my son. That's something no mistake can erase. But I won't erase myself anymore to make you comfortable." His breath hitched, but he didn't interrupt. "This house is mine again," I continued. "Not just in paperwork, not just in locks and leases, but in spirit. You're welcome here. But only if you walk through it like someone who understands what it means to belong without taking." "I want to try," he said, quiet as rain. "Then start with your room," I said. "It's been empty too long, and not just the walls." He looked at me like a child again. Not helpless, just human. That night, I heard him in the basement, opening boxes, clearing out space. By morning, the bed was made, the light was on, and the door was open. The house was quieter than usual the next morning, not the tense kind of quiet that used to settle like dust in every corner, but a lighter one. Clean. Final. Evan came into the kitchen while I was pouring water for the tea. He looked like he hadn't slept, but something in his face had softened, like a wall had finally fallen inward. "She's not coming back," he said simply. I nodded. I already knew. "She said she's tired of feeling like she's competing with a ghost." I looked at him. "I'm not a ghost." "I know that now," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Too late, maybe, but I know." We stood in silence a moment, just the kettle between us beginning to hum. "I think I should move out," he said. "For a while, at least. Find a place, figure things out." "That's your choice," I said. "You're always welcome, but not at the cost of my peace." He looked up sharply. Not offended, just surprised I said it so plainly. "I won't make that mistake again," he said. I believed him, but I also didn't need him to stay. That was the difference now. The next few days passed in quiet motion. Evan packed up what he needed. Not all at once, not in a rush, just a suitcase here, a box there. He didn't ask for help. I didn't offer it. Some journeys need to be taken alone. Marcia noticed his absence, but didn't pry. Rosa, ever observant, offered him a wrapped muffin the day he left. "For the road," she said with a tired smile. He took it like a child receiving a kindness he didn't know he deserved. He left without a scene. No dramatic final words, just a nod at the door and a quiet, "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me." And then he was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I washed the tea mugs, aired out the rooms, watered the plants. Life doesn't stop for the living. It bends and shifts and continues, especially when you let it. That evening, I sat with Marcia on the porch. The sun was low, the air warm and lazy. She read aloud from a novel neither of us particularly liked, but her voice was steady and familiar. A kind of music. Rosa came out eventually, hair loose from her bun, holding a chipped mug of tea. "I think I'm going to stay longer," she said, half apologetic. "If that's okay?" "Of course it's okay," I said. "This place feels more like home than anywhere I've been in years." I didn't say it out loud, but I knew what she meant. There's something about a house built on quiet strength. Not perfection, not politeness, but truth. Even painful truth. Especially painful truth. Marcia closed the book. "You know," she said, "I think you're the bravest person I've met." I shook my head. "I'm just a woman who got tired of sleeping below her own life." She smiled at that. Later, after they'd gone to their rooms, I sat in the hallway and looked at the closed doors. None of them felt like someone else's anymore. They weren't reminders of what I'd lost. They were symbols of what I'd reclaimed. Not just rooms, not just square footage, but space. And in that space, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a footnote. I was the spine of it all. The first Sunday without Evan in the house felt strange only for a moment. I woke early, not from a door slamming or Danielle's voice on speakerphone, but from birdsong slipping through the window. Real birdsong, not background noise, not something you had to ignore. It was like the house itself had exhaled overnight. I put on my robe, brewed my tea, and sat at the kitchen table as the sun stretched across the floor tiles. The peace wasn't new anymore, but it was still tender, like skin just starting to heal. Rosa had left a note by the toaster. "Baking later. Banana or blueberry? Let me know. P.S. Don't do the dishes. You're banned from chores today." I smiled. That girl could nurse a dying man to life, then bake a pie before noon. Marcia joined me with her crossword, slippers shuffling softly across the linoleum. She handed me half a grapefruit already cut, like it was nothing, like we'd been doing this for years. I heard you humming last night, she said, not looking up from her puzzle. I didn't realize I was. You were? I took the grapefruit and tried to remember what it might have been. Some old song, probably. Something my mother sang when she folded laundry or chopped onions too fine. I hadn't hummed in years. After breakfast, I cleaned out the hallway closet, not because it needed it, but because I could. There was an old coat of mine in the back, one I used to wear when Evan was in grade school. It still smelled faintly of lavender in winter. I didn't throw it away. That afternoon, Maeve stopped by. She knocked only once and let herself in like she always had. Well, she said, peeking into the kitchen, you look like a woman who survived something. I did, I said. She sat down with a dramatic sigh and pulled a flask from her purse. Let's toast to it. Maeve, it's 2 p.m. That's when survivors drink. We shared a quiet laugh and sipped just enough to feel the warmth of it. She asked about Evan. I said only what mattered. He's learning. She didn't press further. That's the gift of old friends. They know when silence is part of the answer. Before she left, she paused at the doorway. You know, a man asked me about you the other day. Oh? Wendell Harper. Remember him? His wife passed 2 years ago. Said he saw you at the co-op. I tried not to smile. I haven't seen Wendell since 1998. Well, he saw you, and he asked if you were still as sharp as you used to be. I told him you were sharper. I don't need matchmaking. You don't need silence either. She left with a wink, and I closed the door behind her with a laugh I didn't expect to feel so deep in my chest. That night, I set the table for 3. Rosa made blueberry muffins, Marcia tossed a salad, and I roasted chicken the way my mother taught me. Salt under the skin, lemon inside, patience everywhere else. We ate slowly. No rush, no phones, just clinking forks, shared stories, and nods of understanding. Rosa talked about her father. Marcia recited a line from a poem she loved. I listened more than I spoke, but when I did speak, they listened like it mattered. Because it did. Later, I sat by the window again, tea cooling beside me. I didn't write a list. I didn't need to. Everything I would have written was already here, in the rooms, the food, the quiet. I had come back to myself, and, quietly, I'd made room for others to do the same. The call came on a Wednesday. Not urgent, just Evan's name flashing across the screen while I was trimming the hydrangeas out front. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, he said. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not, I replied, brushing soil from my palms. What's on your mind? There was a pause, not tense this time, just careful. I thought I might stop by this weekend. Maybe bring lunch, if that's all right. I looked at the garden, the porch, the house behind me. I thought about the version of myself who might have said yes too quickly, too politely. And then I said, bring dessert. I already have lunch planned. He chuckled softly. Deal. We hung up with no drama, no lingering guilt. Just a quiet agreement. Things were changing, but not breaking. Marcia's lease was extended. Not because she asked, but because I did. She'd become part of the rhythm here, like a second heartbeat in the hall. Rosa, too, settled in fully. We split the grocery list now. She taught me how to stretch my back in the mornings to keep the aches at bay. I taught her how to bake bread without measuring. It was a trade. One evening, I found a small envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a drawing, pencil on paper, soft lines, and gentle shading. It was me, sitting in the window chair, holding a mug. Rosa's note on the back read, "This house gave me a place to breathe again. So did you." I tucked it into the drawer next to Danielle's letter, next to the old deed, next to the folded list I no longer needed to read. I kept those things not out of bitterness, but memory. The kind that reminds you how far you've come. Evan arrived Saturday with a box of pastries and a plant. "A peace lily," he said, a little embarrassed. Felt appropriate. We sat on the porch. He talked more than I did, but he didn't talk over me. He asked about the house, about Rosa's new shift schedule, about Maeve. He laughed when I told him Wendell Harper asked about me. "Are you going to call him?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." He smiled, then got quiet. "You look good," he said finally. "I feel good." He nodded, but his throat worked like he wanted to say more. I let him sit in it. Before he left, he asked if he could come again next week. Not as a son looking for forgiveness, but as someone who'd finally learned how to knock. "You can," I said, "and bring something green. I'm redoing the porch garden." He grinned. "Deal." That night, I lit a candle in the hallway. A small ritual I'd picked up lately. Not for anyone else, just for myself. A reminder that light doesn't always have to be loud. It just has to stay. As the flame danced in the glass, I thought about everything this house had seen. The weight of silence, the cost of kindness, the echo of dignity returning like footsteps on old floors. I hadn't just rented out rooms. I had reopened a home, and within it, a life. A woman asked me last week if I ever got lonely living with strangers. "They're not strangers," I said. "They're people who see me." And maybe that's what we want most in the end. Not perfection, not praise. Just to be seen, to be heard, to be allowed. If you're reading this and you've ever been made to feel small by a partner, a child, a world too quick to dismiss you, let me say this clearly. You're still here. You still matter. And you don't have to sleep in anyone's basement again. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment. Let someone else know they're not alone.